Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Welcome back to the OT is In, brought to you today by CTC Math. Today, I am joined by occupational therapist Polly Benson, the creator of LedgiLiner, and someone many of you already know from our Making Sense of the Handwriting puzzle course that you can find inside of Homeschool OT. And if you don't know about that one, make sure you find it here in the show notes because it will take you through all the pieces of that handwriting puzzle. Now, in this episode, Polly and I step back from worksheets and drills, and we talk about why handwriting still matters, even in this digital world. We unpack what parents usually mean when they say they want, quote, good handwriting, and how we can support writing in a way that builds confidence, function, and readiness rather than frustration. In this episode, you'll hear us explore what good handwriting actually means, beyond neatness and perfection, how to tell the difference between a child who can't write yet and one who's simply being asked for too much. We'll talk about the foundational skills that need to be in place before handwriting feels easier, and how families can use flexibility to support writing without daily battles. So this conversation is especially for families who feel unsure about when to push, when to pause, and what actually matters when it comes to handwriting. Thanks for being here. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In. Today I have with me Polly Benson, and this is not the first time that Polly and I have chatted, but I'm really excited to be able to share it with the overarching listeners here. Before, we've only recorded for our handwriting class, and you can hear more from Polly within that class, and highly recommend it because it is wonderful. You can find that at homeschoolot.com. Polly, before we dive into a lot about handwriting, the why and the what and all of that, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came here to be doing what you're doing?
Sure. Obviously, I'm a licensed occupational therapist, as you are. And I guess it all started back in grade school when I was on the bus. And there was this incident where this student was upset because the bus driver had pulled over. It was one of those, okay, I'm going to pull over and you all have to quiet down, right? And
Yeah.
So I was in the back of the bus. I was probably like fourth grade maybe or something. And this little girl was crying. And so I didn't know what to do. And I went up front to the bus driver and I said, this little girl's crying. Can we go? We're quiet now. Can we go home? And he took off and everyone's, what did you say? And I was like, I don't know. I just said, stood up for her. Like it was being an advocate. I didn't know that at the time, but through that and like teaching swimming lessons, and I'm a very crafty person. And so doing crafts and things, I really was searching for a field that would allow me to use my creativity and my advocacy. And I found occupational therapy. And I first had looked into physical therapy, but it just wasn't creative enough for me.
Yeah.
And very good profession, but it wasn't for me. My sister's a PT. So I was able to, I was like, you're the PT in the family. I'll be the OT in the family.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I've just loved OT ever since. I love problem solving and I love creating things. And it just was a real good fit for me.
I wonder if that little girl knows at all how she inspired your life.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So within OT, like there are so many different routes and so many different ways that we can go. And you've done something so cool that I don't actually think really anybody else is doing in our profession. So, talk a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah, so what I'm doing now is I work not only with handwriting coaching, but I've developed a stamp that helps people to perform more legible handwriting. So as an OT, I was pushing into the classrooms in school. So we used to pull all our students and be like, okay, let's work on handwriting. And they'd do great in the OT room. And then they would go back to their classroom and it would all fall apart. And so the profession started asking us to push more into the classrooms and be more functional. And so I'd push into fourth grade, fifth grade. There was no handwriting lines. Like in kindergarten, first grade, they have all the nice little handwriting guidelines. And so as I was at a scrapbooking retreat one time, I knew that I wanted a rolling ink stamp. I actually have it somewhere here. If I'll grab it later here, if I can see it. I don't see it. I know it's right around here somewhere because I talk about it a lot, but it was shaped like a pizza cutter. And I was like, if I could just get this stamp with the handwriting guidelines, I could draw lines on those older kids' papers. And what ended up happening was I had one, I couldn't find one that already existed. I had one custom made and I started carrying around the classrooms. And the kids were like, oh, let me try that. And they got really engaged in handwriting. And the teachers were like, oh my gosh, you have to patent that. And I was like, okay, let's go find out how to
Okay.
patent
Yeah.
something. And went home. And now this is my full-time business. I have created 21 different LedgiLiner stamps, and they help kids with their handwriting legibility. And it helps teachers and parents to engage the kids more and gives them that consistent guideline that they need to be able to practice better handwriting.
So we're going to dive in quite a bit to actually what does good handwriting look like. But before even we get there, there's a huge question right now, I'm sure, with a lot of parents of in this digital world, why? Like, why does
Yeah.
that even matter? Why are we going to teach handwriting? And why do we care if our kids have quote unquote good handwriting?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research out there about the brain connections and the fact that when a student is actually writing and understanding what they're writing about, then that's going to help them retain their learning better.
Mhm.
Also, when kids are practicing their handwriting on a consistent basis, there's good eye hand coordination. We've got good sensory input. They've done studies with some people say, let's just go to typing. Typing doesn't give them the same feedback and they don't retain as much. And it is important sometimes in fourth and fifth grade to interject typing, but we also have kindergartners typing. And we need to really teach them that learning for letter formation and that fluency helps them not only with writing fluency, but their reading fluency. And there's a real cool like right left brain connection. And I know in the homeschool world, a lot of parents are really interested in teaching cursive. And a question I get often is, why even bother? Like cursive is a dying art, but it actually is being mandated in 25 states now that they have to teach it. And when I got taught cursive, it was for a grade and it had to be beautiful. And I feel like that is such a wonderful thing that parents have the opportunity to do in homeschool versus in the public school setting. Because in the public school setting, it's here's how to do it. If you like it, stick with it. But there's a real strong right left brain connection when we're doing that fluent handwriting in cursive and really thinking about the ability to make it artistic and make it a little bit more creative on your own. And being able to read cursive, that's a really important skill that a lot of grandparents are still writing in cursive, but
Mhm.
yet there's this disconnect where the student can't read the cursive. And I think cursive is beautiful. And I think it's really beneficial to teach both print and cursive to the students.
I have a lot of families actually who are teaching that you can read print, obviously, very well. And a lot of that you need to learn to write it so that you can read it, but who are focusing more on cursive because of the flow of thought and the motor pattern being so similar. And that, like, you don't have to start at all these different positions on the paper when you're doing cursive, you just go from one to the other. And so it can help with that motor planning as well. And obviously, like I mentioned, the flow of thought, not having to stop and start and stop and start each letter.
Yeah.
So it's been really cool. I told specifically my children who are, I have one son who was like, why? And he asked me why about everything. And I love that. I love to be able to answer it. But why do I need to do this? And my answer to him was always, yeah, you may not be writing your entire papers. In fact, that would be really silly when you're an adult and you're writing out this whole long paper. But I never want to be the reason that I'm hindering you from being able to do something that's going to help your brain to learn. So, if taking notes, if that's where you're going to be writing, if you're writing, I don't know, a grocery list, if you're writing your letter to your grandparents, right? Then I want to make sure that you are capable of doing all of those things and not, I never learned that. But
Yeah.
let's try it. Let's have this
Yeah.
underlying skill.
Absolutely. Especially parents that have kids that struggle with print and
Mhm.
reading. Like, why not try something different and do that brain interrupt? And we can interrupt that like poor processing and try to do a different type of processing that might be easier for them.
Ah, oh, so good. All right, so let's take a spot then from here's your why, and that's we mentioned several different reasons of why we're still going to be working on handwriting, whether it's cursive or print. But what does it look like good handwriting? Like as OTs, how do we define good handwriting?
I think one thing that I really landed on years ago was legibility. It's not about how you hold the pencil. You can hold your pencil a million different ways and still have legible handwriting. And so when we're looking at legibility, then it's what exactly is missing in the legibility process. So I had a student that didn't always go to the top of the paper. How
Mhm.
important is that? If you're making an H or an, it makes a big difference,
Yeah.
right? Do you have a tall line or do you have a short line? And so that was one of his goals, literally to just differentiate between the N and the H. And so it's things like that really help to improve legibility in the long run. Letter closure. So if you don't close your letter A, you've got a letter U. So let's, that can be a goal. So if we can just pinpoint maybe that one small or two small things to focus on, then that can help legibility go a long way.
Love that. And so you mentioned closure and you also mentioned like height and so spacing.
Right.
And I would definitely think that orientation, right, of the on the line, which brings exactly into what you were doing of
Right.
what are the lines and how do we teach our kids to stay on them?
Yeah,
Amazing.
there's a lot of techniques for that too. Whether you talk about tall letters, small letters, and fall letters that fall below the line, or whether you
Mhm.
use sky, grass, ground, fence, what types of letter cues, but whatever your word cues are, whatever you're teaching that student, then it's important that you relate it to them. I had a student that loved fish, so we talked about underwater letters and just
So good.
make it relevant to them, and then they can catch on a little quicker. And make sure you're teaching what those lines are. Do you want to use top line, middle line, baseline, or do you want to use something more fun? Do you want to use rhymes for letter formations? Really just catering it to the student's interest will go a long way as well.
And such a benefit of homeschooling. Another thing that I love
Yeah.
when you're saying. So that is definitely a way that we can use our flexibility within homeschooling to support this handwriting development. So, what are some of these other foundations you feel like that need to be in place even before we're starting with that handwriting?
Certainly there's the grasp. That's
Mhm.
certainly a good foundation is if the students are younger and they haven't developed an improper grasp. So we're looking at the tripod and the quadruped
Mhm.
grasp. Posture, I think, is really important that they
So
have
good.
good support on their seat. We used to say 90, 90, 90, but it's ish now. But we do need the feet supported. The feet should not be dangling. And some homeschool settings are really good where they have a small desk and the students' feet are supported, and other homeschools are at the kitchen table and the feet aren't
Mhm.
supported. And so, what can we do? We can put something under their feet to give them that support. Why is that important? They're going to fatigue, and they need to know body awareness and where their body is in space to be able to understand letter formation and, as you said, motor planning. And so, let's support the seat. Let's support the feet. We'll support the back, and then the arms. How many of our kids are writing up on
Sure.
a table super high? So we may need to give them a booster seat because their elbows should be above the table height. And so you want, and you know that
Mhm.
when you're working at a table, okay, maybe me, when I'm working at a table, if it's too high, I tend to sit on my feet. Like I'm that
Yeah.
kind of person. And that helps to ground me and let me know where I am. And what we found with my son was he needed to do that to focus because not only was his table too high, but the lights and all the things in the classroom that were distracting to him. So we actually had it written in his IEP where he could perch and be on top of his feet. And that decreased the
So we
distraction
can
because he
look
was more
down.
yeah, and it's things like that posture and the seating, the lighting environment, all that is foundational. Fine motor skills, if the students are on their devices all day, they're not coloring and painting and using clay and playing outside and doing all those things that improve their hand strength, then we need to try to get them to do more things that improve their hand strength. Hand strengthening alone will not improve letter formation and letter legibility, but it is a foundational skill. And what really helps letter legibility, handwriting, is mostly practice and rote practice and practicing over and over. And there are some apps. You can use a stylus. I always
Mhm.
recommend a stylus on the tracing apps where you can trace the letters and things like that. And I think that's a really good like tool to help the parent. Okay, you work on this, practicing this letter formation on the iPad, and that's engaging for the student. And then we're going to try it on our practice paper. And so then that can help them with that transference of skill.
I love that you mentioned that because there are so many times that I see on social media where parents are like, my kid has messy handwriting. And every single time, the first thing that I see people saying is, oh, play with putty and get out your work on those fine motor skills. And I'm like, stop, back it up, back it up. So we need to think through A, like you mentioned, the core strength. And do you know where your body is before we're really working on these hands? And then
Mhm.
we need to provide that practice. Look at the entire environment. Where are you sitting? How are you sitting there? We used to, with my kiddos when they were little, I would actually have them sit on the bottom step because we did not have a small little desk, but they would sit on my bottom step. I'm pointing like you can see my stairs. They're right here. But so that way their feet could be touching the ground and it just gave them the right amount for their hips. And they had some back support on the step. And then I had a little slant board on a lap desk so they could write right here. So changing that environment, like you mentioned with your son, that makes such a huge difference. So then they do have the endurance for the practice.
Yeah.
So, not that I don't love you playing with beads and whatever, but that's not the end. That's not the ultimate can make a change.
Yeah.
Let's take a break here for just 1 second so we can hear from our sponsor, and then we will be right back. When handwriting feels hard, it's often because the output demand is bigger than a child's readiness. And the same thing can happen in math. That's one reason that I love CTC Math for homeschool families. The instruction is clear, step by step, and mastery based, so kids can focus on understanding the math instead of fighting the format. Parents don't have to worry about gaps, and kids aren't rushed past skills before they're ready. From an occupational therapy perspective, that flexibility matters. You can adjust how your child writes, how they show their work, or how much they do in one sitting without losing the integrity of the lesson. So if you're looking for a math program that supports learning and your child's nervous system, you can learn more about CTC Math through the link in the show notes. Guys, there is a free trial and a special discount code, so be sure that you make the show notes your first stop. Now, back to the show. Welcome back. So we are here with Polly from LedgiLiner, who is giving us such a wealth of information on why and what does handwriting look like. So we've talked a little bit about defining good handwriting, but is neat handwriting specifically the goal, or are there other kind of indicators that we should be paying attention to make sure our kids are getting that flow of thought?
Yeah, I think perfection is never the goal, right? Nobody's perfect. And if you look at thousands of handwriting samples, not every single one is going to be the same, right? There's
Yeah.
always going to be differentiation. The goal really is legibility. And if we can move away from perfect letters and look more at what the writing output is functional, then that's the important piece of it to me. If your student doesn't like to write, then there's other fun ways. Have them, like you said, do a grocery list. Can we do a scavenger hunt and they can write down things that they find that are white? Or if you have to find this object and what color is it? And maybe grading that task for the student's ability. If they're in if you have a wide range of children in homeschool, right? So you might be working with a 4 or 5 year old that's writing, and you might be working with a middle school and high schooler that's
Mhm.
all at the same time. Let's do one activity together, but the youngest student just has to write the beginning letter. And then the middle student can write the word, and then the older student can write a sentence or a paragraph about it. And that's just a real fun way to get the entire family involved. We're going to do the same activity, and we can grade it based on what that student's abilities are. And
I'm going
as
to
you,
stop you for 1 second because you're using the term grade, which I hear as an OT, but I think
okay,
might be parents who are thinking like, wait, I'm giving them an A or a C. What do
okay.
you mean by grade?
So grading is think of grading the ground, like you're going to make it smooth, and or are you going to make it stair step up? And so grading in the OT world, that word means to make it harder, easier, or more difficult based on that student's ability.
Love that. Yeah. If we're looking at this as every kiddo can be working on these things together, what about the kid who's, no, I'm not doing it. I'm bad at this, or refusing because could be because they're afraid of not being perfect or writing something really neat, but also because handwriting is hard. So, how can we come alongside and support our kids if that's their thought?
Yeah, so the biggest thing with handwriting is it's a multi-cognitive process. So it is a thinking process. I have to think about, where does my pencil go on? How do I hold my pencil? How am I seating? Where does my pencil go on the paper? What am I writing? Am I copying or actually forming the words in my head first and then putting it on paper? And then what am I actually writing about? And then if we ask them, write about what you had for lunch today. Now they have to go back and think about what they had for lunch
Yeah.
today versus yesterday. It's a huge cognitive process. And so one of the ways to help motivate that child is to take away some of those cognitive processing. So maybe they're going to copy, maybe they can tell you about it. They could voice record what they want to say, and then we could play back the voice recording. We could play handwriting games. There's a lot of fun games to play and make it more engaging for the student. Or you could use LedgiLiners. Like LedgiLiners are very motivating for the kids. They get to draw their own lines. And it doesn't matter if the line's crooked. Like a lot of people will say to me, oh, I can't get my line straight. How do I make my line straight? Which, by the way, is pulling top to bottom. So many people go across the page and your arm naturally arcs. They don't realize you have to
Yeah.
let your elbow come away from your body. But for students, it doesn't matter. Make a curvy road, drive a car down it, and then let them write on a curve. Like, it makes them think a little bit harder. It slows them down. So now we're thinking about what we're writing. Have them trace it. Like, you could make it in a yellow marker, and then they have to trace that and try to match your writing. That precision skill, the placement of the pencil on the line versus under or above the line,
Mhm.
that's helping that motor control. And then when they're all done with that, they can cut down the road. So one fun thing with using the LedgiLiners is they look like little roads. And so that dashed line is a great cutting guideline, and you can make a little curvy line, and then they can take their scissors and drive down the road.
So good.
This one has a really fun little car magnet on it. And so you can drive the car down the road as you're working on those cutting skills. And that's super fun too.
That is really fun. It is really fun. So I love the way that you've talked about like we can change the child's mindset by changing again not only the environment but also the occupation or the activity that we're doing here. What, as parents, do you often find that there's a specific mindset of no, we have to get this right or this has to be perfect or whatever? And how do you help parents work through that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I'm very much a perfectionist. And my first two children were great with handwriting. And my third one, wait, I've done this twice before. Why are you not picking this up? And as a teacher, you can talk to the students and you're the authority. But as the parent,
Mhm.
they're like, why are you the expert? Sometimes it's important to think about bringing in an expert. You might
Mhm.
need a little bit of OT help. You might need an outside person. Other times you can find some videos and things and help that student to see that maybe there's other, or that you're right, or that some
Yeah.
of what you're saying is a good idea. But as the parent's mindset, I always went back to scripture and I always went back to nobody's perfect and we don't have to be perfect. And it's being okay with the legibility and testing that. Pick your battles. Is this a fight worth fighting? Is this student's stress and the stress between you and that tension worth it to get nice handwriting, or are you just really splitting hairs? And we want them to enjoy it. We want them
Mhm.
to enjoy reading and enjoy school. So
Yeah,
there's definitely a mindset of the parent that has to take a step back and just be like, is this a battle I want to pick?
I love this. And so many things that you've just mentioned here, like about being able to understand the underlying, but also being able to pick your battles and your struggles and what is important to you. So, first, before we say the ways that they can find you within Homeschool OT, can you tell everyone where they can find you in the greater world if they want to hear more from you?
Yeah, sure. I have a YouTube channel, and my Instagram is definitely where we're going to find the most like ideas and what LedgiLiners are. They're rolling ink stamps that draw out handwriting guidelines, and we have handwriting lines, we have boxes. We have a couple brand new stamps I'm super excited about. One is this giant box. And what's great about it is for brand new
Yeah.
writers, like 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, you can start off with pre-writing strokes where you're just marking inside a box and kind of teaching them to go from full paper down to a smaller area. But they're great for like little comic strips for
Oh,
middle
that's so
school.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so they can make beginning, middle, and end little comic strips and things like that. But my website is LedgiLiner.com, and that's where you're able to shop. And I have a membership site as well. I do some trainings throughout the year. I teach at both homeschool conventions, and I also teach online. And my membership site is LedgiLiner.net. And so that's $9.99 a year. You get unlimited worksheets, lesson plans, all for handwriting, all based on fine motor, sensory motor skills and how to motivate the kids. And then finally, just if they want to join my email list, you get free worksheet every Wednesday, you get Sunday strategies. And on Fridays, I like to feature different other OTs that have businesses or OT products or seminars that are coming up and things like that. So it's just 3 times a week is my email list, and they can join that either online or they can email me, polly@legiliner.com.
I love that. That's so great. Thank you so much for being here. And to hear more from Polly within Homeschool OT, we have all the pieces of the handwriting puzzle class, and Polly is one of our featured speakers in there to talk more about the how. Like, we covered a lot of the what and the why here, but more of these strategies onto how to implement this into your homeschool. You can find us over there. If today's conversation helped you to see handwriting a little differently, I want to give you something practical to take with you. We've created a companion handout for episode 92 and 93 that will help you slow down, observe your child, and start breaking handwriting into meaningful pieces instead of feeling like you need to fix everything at once. You can download that guide using the link in the show notes. And if you're realizing that handwriting feels like a puzzle with too many missing pieces, you're not imagining that. Inside Homeschool OT, we have a course called Making Sense of the Handwriting Puzzle that walks you through how handwriting actually develops, what matters most, and how to support your child in a way that protects confidence and regulation, not just letter formation. There's no rush and no pressure. Just know that support exists when you're ready for it. You can learn more about that course through the link in the show notes as well. You're doing important work by paying attention to your child, and you don't have to do it alone, because remember, the OT is always in. Thanks for being here.